We're going to start with just, some basics. How do I make a volume group and how do I put a logical volume in it? So let's go ahead and get started with that. So first of all, I've got some additional block devices that I've added to this machine. Volume groups get laid down on top of disks, whether they're virtual, physical, whatever. You need a block device to lay it down on top of. In this case, they're virtual disks that I've added to this machine. So we're going to first create a physical volume, pvcreate. And what this does is it preps the block device to receive a volume group and logical volumes on top of it, right? There's stages here that we have to deal with. So we're going to go dev loop 0, because like I said, these are virtual things that I've added to this machine. And what this does, go ahead.
Nate, in logical volume parlance, it puts down a volume group descriptor area.
There you go.
VGD.
Right. Okay, so now that we have the PV or physical volume created, there's another command called pvdisplay, which will just tell you what physical volumes or PVs are connected to this system. You can see this is the only one we've got. So now we're going to add a new volume group on top of that physical volume. So we're going to do vgcreate. You're going to notice a very similar theme to how all these commands are named. All right, so vgcreate, we're going to give it a name. We're going to call it vg0 because it's whatever, simple name. And we're just going to point it at dev 0, which is that physical volume that we just made. Okay, and now that just said, okay, this PV is part of this volume group. It's really, all we're really doing at this point is putting down like metadata, tying these things together. Now, if we do a VG display, only if you type out the AY at the end of VG display, we can see we now have a volume group on this system, and it gives us an idea of how much space there is available in the volume group. Now, if there were logical volumes deployed in here, it would also tell you what's allocated, but in this case, it's empty. So it tells us there's 511 extents, physical extents is what that means. And it tells us about how big it is. It says that it's just under 2 gigabytes, right? And that makes sense because the disks that I made, I have 3 2 gigabyte disks, and we're going to use the other ones in future examples. All right, so let me refresh the screen here so that we can get this clean. Now, what this does is it puts a logical volume, which is the place where we can actually put a file system inside of the volume group, okay? So LV create, and then we have to give it a size. Now, there's a couple ways you can give it a size. You can specify this based on how many megabytes, gigabytes, kilobytes, whatever you want this thing to be, or you can specify the extents, the number of extents you want it to be. So in this case, the lowercase l says this number of extents. We know there were 511 extents available, so we're going to make it 511 extents. We're going to fill the whole thing, and we're going to give it a name with the -n flag. We're just going to call it LV0. You might give this a name that's a little more descriptive. For example, when I'm provisioning, for example, my home lab, I named the logical volumes based on what the data I intend to store in them are, right? So I have one that's called like VM store for the virtual machines that I run, right? Just an example. So you can call it just about anything. I'm sure there's limits on the characters, but things you can usually name files after you can change, or you can set these names to. All right, then we're going to tell it what volume group to put that logical volume in. Now, there's extra commands you can put in here that specify things like the size of extents and yada, yada, but we're going pretty basic with this. All right, and now we actually have a logical volume inside of our volume group. If I do an LV display, remember what I said? PV display, VG display, LV display. There's a theme here. LV display is going to show us the logical volumes that are inside of or that are attached to the system. And in this case, we've got VG0 with an LV0. It even tells you what path the interactor that LVM lays out. Okay, now the last thing we can do is let's go ahead and make a file system in here. We're going to make it an XFS file system. Now, again, there are extra commands we could be throwing in here, but we're just going to go basic here. And we're going to say, make an XFS file system on dev VG0 LV0. And there we go. It makes us a file system. So now you can see that we're treating the logical volume like it's a disk, right? You could have written that directly to a block device or to a partition on a block device. In this case, the logical volume, you might almost think of it as a partition, right? This is the device which you're going to be putting your file system and then your storage in.